Welcome to Introducing OMSC at PTS. I'm Tom Hastings. I'm the Executive Director of the Overseas Ministry Study Center at Princeton Theological Seminary. And today we are thrilled to invite Dr. Darrell Whiteman, who's a missiological anthropologist and a person who has been a leader in this field for many years and a devotee of OMSC and a great supporter, as well as a leader of seminars, as a trustee, and in many other ways. Darrell has a ministry around the world that is quite remarkable. He's an author, he's a former professor, and the head of the Stanley School at the Asbury Seminary. And he has been a leader at the American Society for Missiology and IAMS, which is an offshoot of the American Society, the international version of that. And he's also been a leader in the academic side of editing journals. But today, we're going to ask Darrell to focus on OMSC and its role and its importance in the world of mission and world Christianity. And Darrell, welcome. We're so happy to have you with us today.
Well, I'm really happy for this opportunity, Tom. And when you sent me an email, I was grateful that that you wanted to do this. At first, I was a little hesitant. I thought, well, what do I have to say about OMSC? And then as I started thinking about it, I realized I have a 35-year history with OMSC.
Yes.
And it goes back to 1985, when I attended my first seminar. It was when OMSC was still in Ventnor. And it was a seminar, I think, on community development, led by Ted Ward. And there I met Ian Douglas, who would later become a bishop of the Episcopal Church and later a trustee of OMSC. And so that was the beginning. And I was a young professor in the E. Stanley Jones School of World Mission and Evangelism at Asbury Theological Seminary, having just come from 7 years in the South Pacific, in Solomon Islands and Papua New Guinea as a Methodist missionary. So I was committed to that whole approach, and I just thought, my goodness, this Overseas Ministry Study Center, this is a phenomenal organization. Well, a couple years later, Gerald Anderson invited me to attend what was then called the study group. Now, this was a rather elite group. It was by invitation only. It was mostly for mission executives. And the book they were discussing was Harvey Kahn's Eternal Word and Changing World. And it was theology, anthropology, and mission in trialogue. And I remember as a young kid, I'm still in my 30s, walking into that room saying, wow, look at all these important people. How come I got to be here? And it was a very, very rich experience. And so that was my second time. And that was after OMSC had moved from Ventnor up to New Haven.
Yeah.
And we met in the English library. So it wasn't, couldn't accommodate a whole lot of people. But that was my second time there. Then Jerry Anderson tried to get me to come to what was then later called the Mission Leaders Forum, MLF. And I was a young professor at Asbury and too busy mentoring students, teaching courses. And I just kept putting him off. I said, no, I don't have time for this. Well, eventually, because he was so persistent, as you know, Jerry Anderson can be, I agreed. And when I went to that first Mission Leaders Forum, I said, these are my people. Wow, this is a network of people from around the world, people committed to God's mission in the world, who are understanding and making contributions to world Christianity. And I think from that time to the last time we met, I don't think I ever missed a gathering of the Mission Leaders Forum. And so I've often felt that was one of the great experiences and events that OMSC was able to pioneer and continue. So that's how I got started, and that was just the beginning.
Yes, it was. In fact, I was going to mention, you forgot to mention that you were also a trustee for many years at OMSC. And just before me, you were the interim executive director, as well as the editor of the IBRM. But for a long time, you have led a seminar at OMSC as well as participating and helping to lead the MLF, as you've mentioned. So looking back, Darrell, what have been some of the highlights of your personal involvement at OMSC besides the ones you've mentioned?
Probably the longest sustaining time for me at OMSC was the seminar that I would give. I think the title of it was Culture, Values, and Worldview, Anthropology for Mission Practice. And I'm sure I gave that over 20 years there. It used to be a part of what OMSC used to call the January Mission Seminar. And for the first 2 weeks in January every year, they'd have a different topic and a different speaker each day. And so they would bring in, top line missiologists, Dana Robert and others like that. Then the third week of January was my course. And oftentimes seminary students would stay on for the third week, take that class. And what I loved about it, it was ecumenically rich. I always had a half a dozen Catholics there, along with some good Pentecostals and everything in between. And I love teaching that course the third week of January. And then usually the fourth week, another seminar, oftentimes Tianu would be one of the presenters for that fourth course. So it was out of that time every year. I mean, I would build my schedule around never to be any place else in the world the third week of January. And so on one of those occasions, Theodora Bilcone, I'm probably butchering her last name. She was a Catholic sister from the Philippines. And in my classes, I would oftentimes talk about the naked gospel. Now, this is a baton. And on the baton is written 2 Timothy 2:2. And I'm going to read it here since I don't have it memorized. You have heard me teach things that have been confirmed by many reliable witnesses. Now teach these truths to other trustworthy people who will be able to pass them on to others. Now, I use this baton to talk about what I call the naked gospel. And I would say, so oftentimes we've taken the gospel wrapped in the American flag or our culture. And so we've confused the two. And so really what we've got to do is, we can't deny who we are, but let's hide that and let the gospel stand for itself. Yes, of course, we got this gospel inherited from a Jewish understanding. We're not Jews, but we recognize Jesus as the Messiah, and so we hang on to that part. So during the seminar, I would always be looking and praying for who is the person to whom I should pass this on. And that year we were meeting out at the Mercy Center. They hadn't met there for quite a few years. And Dr. Diane Comp was attending that seminar. It was the first time she heard me teach. And by the end of the week, I knew the person who must receive this, and that was Sister Theodora. And so I gave her the naked gospel, and I said, now you take this naked gospel back to the Philippines. And you let the Filipinos understand what does it mean to be a follower of Jesus in that context. Well, I anticipating this interview and thinking about what were some of the highlights. That clearly was one of the highlights for me, was passing this baton on to her. And I remember there were tears in that room. And she realized in some ways the joy and yet the gravity of passing the gospel from one place to another and letting it be the naked gospel, not all clouded over with our culture, with our particular preferences of values. Well, I sent her an email yesterday, and she wrote back, she said, oh, I've never forgotten that. In fact, she says, I have it in a special place next to the cross in our chapel. And I see it all the time. And I'm reminded that that is what God has called me to do, to take the naked gospel to here in the Philippines. So that was one of the highlights. And so it was meeting people like Sister Theodora and others who were so committed to mission, and yet the cultural part of mission which is what I focused on in my seminars. That was new to them, and they just loved it, and always encouraged me. So that was one example. Mm-hmm.
Wonderful, wonderful. I'm sure there are many other people you could speak about. You know, you've mentioned Dana Robert, Jerry Anderson, Ted Ward, and I know that there's a whole long list of people you could speak about. And Sister Theodora, I love that story, Darrell. Thank you very much for sharing that. So you know, you've looked at OMSC from inside, from outside. You know, you've been a leader there. You've had responsibilities there, weighty responsibilities sometimes. So looking back, how do you see the unique contribution of OMSC? And I don't want to forget the unique contribution of OMSC's journal, the International Bulletin of Mission Research, which, by the way, you renamed. You changed from missionary to mission, and I was very grateful that you had made that very significant, some people may not even notice, change, which really speaks to the key aspect. This is not just missionary bulletin, this is mission, you know, the International Bulletin of Mission Research, not just missionary research. So, and it's always been that way, but I think they misnamed it, don't you?
Well, when it was initially named Missionary Research, that probably was appropriate, but that was in the 60s and 70s.
That's correct, 70s, yeah.
And one of the reasons that I wanted to, well, there's a couple things I did with the IBMR. During the year that I was the interim, that was costing us about $150,000 a year to produce. And I was trying to save some money for us. And one day I'm taking a shower, and the idea comes to me, hey, why shouldn't I contact Sage Publication and see if they would be interested in taking over the International Bulletin? Not only would it save us money, we actually over time might be able to make money. And so I got in contact with them. Now, my experience of Sage is because for 13 years, I had been the editor of the journal Missiology, which is the journal for the American Society of Missiology. And Sage had approached me year after year asking if they could take over our journal, and I kept holding them off. I said, no, we're doing fine without your help. But eventually they made a strong case, and we are absolutely delighted with the way Sage has published Missiology, has produced it. Circulation has increased. We get a considerable amount of money from them now. So I said, well, let's go down the same path with the International Bulletin of Missionary Research. And they were very eager to take it on. And so not only did we end up changing the format, but you're right, we changed the name. I said, we've got to come into the 21st century of world Christianity. And it's well, for me, it's a theological issue because mission is God's mission. That's and correct. Why shouldn't we be doing really good research in the whole area of God's mission? So there are six different, what I'd call missiological journals in English. The oldest is the International Review of Missions, started in 1912, which is an organ of the World Council of Churches. That's published twice a year. Then there's Mission Studies. That is the journal from the International Association for Mission Studies. It's a smaller journal. It's good. It's scholarly. Then the third one would be what I would call the major journal of the American Society of Missiology, which is Missiology. And I've mentioned how Sage helped us with that, and I edited that for 13 years. Then there's EMQ, which eventually went out of business, and that was the Evangelical Missions Quarterly. And then now we come to Missionalia, which is the journal of the South African or Southern African Missiological Society. So number 6 is the International Bulletin of Mission Research. Tom, I think the IBMR is absolutely the very, very top journal in the whole field. There we are. Oh, In fact, I like that cover. The reason I think it's a top journal is because of the way it's laid out, because of the quality of the articles that are there. A couple of helpful things. Every year you list what are the 10 most outstanding books in mission studies the year before, the book reviews, the articles. It's just, it's well written, easy to read, and always very, very timely. So even when I was the editor of Missiology, I had to say, well, we're the number 2.
Well, I really appreciate that vote of confidence, and I agree with you, and I can tell you that Andrew Walls told me when I became the executive director and the editor of IBMR that this was the gold standard. And that put a lot of pressure on me because I was a practical theologian who had been engaged in mission, but not a missiologist or a mission historian. So I've had a big learning curve, and I just want to thank you as my predecessor as the editor of the IBMR. Thank you for making that wise decision to move it from being an in-house journal to being this widely circulated. I think last year we received a report that the circulation is up over 9,000 currently.
Wow, that's
so,
just terrific.
Yeah.
Well, you've become a pretty good missiologist in your time.
Well, that's very kind of you. So, you know, one of the things, Darrell, that strikes me about OMSC that is unique, and I really keep coming back to this, is the ability to bring together scholars with practitioners. So I wonder what you can say about your own experience, you know, in interacting with our residents. We're now calling them global partners, by the way.
Good.
Instead of just residents, although that's a good name too, I'm sure, in its time, but we're calling them global partners. So I wonder if you can say something about that interface between practice and scholarship, research.
Yeah. Well, good question. As I was reflecting on this, I was thinking about how OMSC started as houses of friendship. And it was really a place for worn out missionaries to come home on furlough and get renewed, rejuvenated, rested. And that was a wonderful beginning. And of course, that was in the age when American missionaries, which were the dominant group, would go for 4 years, come home for a year, and then go back for another 4 years. So it was primarily a place of rest. And then under Gerald Anderson, it started to move more in the direction of a study center. I think that increased even more so when they first moved to New Haven, right across the street from the Day Mission Library, which was one of the world's premier mission holdings. But then in the 25 years or so that we were in New Haven, I think the scholarship continued, but I think it became more of a resident place for tired, worn out missionaries. And the day of American missionaries being there on furlough, that was gone. That had completely disappeared, which was a reflection, frankly, of the whole movement of world Christianity. And so now we were getting people from Africa, from India, unfortunately not very many from Latin America, and then also from Asia. And over the years, toward the end of the time at OMS in New Haven, the dominant group were Koreans. And they were mostly Koreans who were in need of rest and relaxation and renewal. And so I am so excited the fact that you're shifting not away from the resident program. That's important. We all need rest and renewal. But the scholarship, the academic study, all of that is going to help further mission more than just a lot of places for people to go have a nice rest. Right. And so personally for me as a professor, as a practitioner, I've always seen these two having to go together. And although I've been an academician, my main interest right from the very beginning, the reason I got a PhD in anthropology was to be a better missionary. I never intended to be a professor or a scholar. I wanted to be a better missionary. And I realized that missionaries kept missing the boat because they didn't understand the cultural context in which mission was occurring. They didn't understand how their own culture was shaping their theology, shaping how they read the Bible. And so I thought, perhaps as an anthropologist, I can become a better missionary. So when I was a professor at Asbury for over 20 years there, when a doctoral student would come and ask if I would be their mentor, I would require them to pick a topic that was an issue for their church or their mission. I said, I want you to write on a problem that can be helped by your research. So the scholarship helps to inform the practice. Mm-hmm. And that was the hallmark of all of my teaching there. And I see the same thing happening at OMSC, that with better scholarship, with good research, we can inform better practice. And one of my concerns these days, why I continue teaching and training all over the world, is that we have an awful lot of people out there who have not been informed by good scholarship, not been informed by good research. Mm-hmm. And so they're just in the old patterns that they've used for so many years. Mm-hmm. So that's why I think the OMSC, bringing these two things together again, in the context of an ecumenical community with cultural diversity, it's almost heaven on earth.
That's really good. I appreciate that. So you've talked about OMSC, you've talked about IBMR. Now, you do know, because you've been so deeply involved, that OMSC also has involvements in wider circles of influence, like the ASM, IAMs, et cetera. I wonder if you can talk about that a little bit, about how OMSC and IBMR have played a pivotal role, both in founding, but also in developing these two, especially ASM and IAMs.
Well, I thought about this, and in terms of the leadership of OMSC, Gerald Anderson was one of the early presidents of the American Society of Missiology. In fact, one of the early founders, frankly. He also was one of the early presidents of the International Association for Mission Studies, EOMS. Then John Bonk comes along, and he's also a president of ASM and a president of the International Association for Mission Studies. And then I come along as an interim, and I'm also a past president of the American Society of Missiology and the International Association for Mission Studies. So it's almost like the name OMSC sort of puts a mantle of trustworthiness or a mantle of scholarship on these people. But so much for that. The important thing in my mind is that OMSC as a place where scholars from around the world can interact with each other, a journal which publishes material that's being researched. It's just the node of an international network that brings people together. And that's what spreads then throughout these professional guilds, like the American Society of Missiology, the International Association for Mission Studies. And then with the series we had of scholars in residence, that also took the community, the wonderful community experience, the scholarship that was being done, that left from New Haven, from Ventnor, out to the rest of the world. And so going and coming, OMSC has been sort of an important node in a worldwide network. And in my mind, that's what's going to continue.
Yeah, so that's the next thing I'd like you to reflect on briefly is, what are your best hopes for the future of OMSC at Princeton Theological Seminary?
Well, I wrote down a couple things. Let me take a look. Yeah, I've got 7 things here.
Okay.
For me, the most important thing is that OMSC is going to be able to continue for another 100 years. Putting it on a solid financial foundation, that is absolutely critical. And as you know, as we sort of wound down toward the first 100 years, it looked like we might not make it to our first centenary. So, so in my mind, that is so encouraging to know that we're going to have this institution for a long time to come, and so that to me is really critical. I think there are going to continue to be people in mission who need physical, spiritual, emotional rest, but also need the stimulation of their mind. And OMSC, I think, will reach out to more and more people around the world. It's going to be a greater reflection of what I would call world Christianity, not just mission from the West to the rest. Where, as an institution, it's making that transition without losing one iota of its commitment to God's mission in the world. The other thing that I'm excited about is I see it as a place where we will continue to function ecumenically. In a world, particularly here in America, where we're becoming so divisive over perspectives or philosophies or theologies, we need places where people can talk to each other, where people can interact and exchange ideas, and where there's civil discourse. And a place like OMSC, in a world that is becoming increasingly fractured, that makes that possible. And what a great gift to world Christianity that a place like this can become. Yeah, I think those are the things. The importance of renewal, the importance of ecumenical cooperation. Make sure that we always have reflecting world Christianity, which means a lot of cultural diversity. And the other thing that has been representative for me in my past time there is there's a friendly spirit there. It's a spirit of a place where we're here together. We have different degrees, different experiences, but we are committed together to working together. And that sense of community, we must never lose that, because that is such a powerful thing. And that always brings hope. When there's a spirit of community in a world that has lost its ability sometimes to be community.
Yeah, thank you. That's wonderful, Darrell. Next year, unfortunately, they couldn't come this year, but next year we have a group all ready to come from Brazil, China, India, Myanmar, Nigeria, South Africa, and South Korea. There'll be 8 global partners for our first cohort here in Princeton. But they represent a broad diversity in terms of culture, in terms of church tradition, but what they hold in common is, as OMSC has testified to and been in the leadership of, is a commitment to God's mission in the world, however that is understood. And that's the beautiful thing from my point of view, and you've articulated that so well, because we will have different understandings of how that takes place, whether it's more in evangelism or church planting, the traditional mission, or education, or social services, or social reform, or medical work, you name it. The way people understand mission has really blown apart. But one thing that I've learned, and I think you exemplify this in your own welcoming teaching kind of ethos that you bring to your teaching, very welcoming, is that even though we may not see eye to eye on certain theological issues or social or political issues, we are all committed to Jesus Christ and his mission. And that, to me, makes all the difference. And, you've articulated that beautifully. So in closing, in light of the dramatically changed landscape of the global church in our lifetime, it happened in our lifetime, how do you envision future developments in terms of research, in missiology, mission studies, world Christianity, intercultural studies, intercultural theology, and all the cognate fields, depending on where you are, you call it by different names. ecumenical studies. How do you see future developments given the shift in the global church from what we call the global north to the global south, which is happening more and more?
Well, I think we have to keep working on developing a learning posture.
Yeah.
That's hard for us as Americans because we are the teachers, we are the knowers, and you can't fake that. I mean, if it's in your spirit to really be a learner, to be open to the other, then that comes through. And if it's not there, you simply can't fake it. And so in my mind, that will be one of the most important things, is this learning posture. Another thing that's really important in my own thinking and teaching is the incarnation as a model of how we are to do ministry. In the same sense that God becomes Jesus the Jew and empties himself of his power, his position, his prestige, in order to identify with human beings. That's what we're called to do as well. And whether it's Korean missionaries working in Nigeria, whether it's American missionaries working in Brazil, this whole emptying of ourselves and being willing to identify with the other and to walk in the other's shoes, that learning posture, that sense of humility, there's nothing more important than that. And so I love the scholarship. I love all that. It's important. But at the end of the day, it's how do we function day to day with people who are different from ourselves? And that is the key. And so as world Christianity develops, now we're still only about a third of the world recognizes themselves as followers of Jesus. So there's a whole third that says, I've heard about it, but I'm not interested. And then there's another third that says, who's Jesus? So there's plenty of opportunity to be involved in mission, but just because political colonialism seems to be behind us, the colonization of the mind is still very, very much with us. And those are the things we've got to become aware of. Those are the things we have to be responsible for, and change our thinking, change our attitude. And it's the spirit of incarnational identification, the spirit of humility, the spirit of learning from the other. Those are, in my mind, the critical pieces of what it means to be in mission today. Now, this weekend, I'm doing teaching on Zoom with Australian Baptists around the world. and they're working with Muslims. And they're working with Muslim followers of Jesus. And they had learned about me from somehow. And they want me to do some speaking with them on this topic. So it's the same thing, whether it's Australian Baptists working in Myanmar, it's the same attitude. We are all children of God. We're all called to participate in God's mission. And so let's do it in the spirit of Jesus, which is the spirit of humility, the spirit of incarnational identification. And I think OMSC can be a place that models that encourages that, and develops it even further.
Wonderful. Darrell, I can't thank you enough for sharing your time and your insights with us today. We really appreciate it. We just want to thank you, and we look forward to seeing you in God's time.
Well, thank you again for the invitation. I love OMSC immensely. And I hope the day will come when I'll be able to actually come to Princeton again and see you physically and maybe participate in some way or another.